Hi everyone, this is Doug with North Table Mountain Christmas Lights, and in this video I'm going to talk about editing your Christmas display footage in Adobe Premiere Pro. Now on YouTube there are a lot of videos that talk about editing in Premiere Pro, but nothing is specifically geared towards a Christmas light enthusiast who is shooting at night in poor lighting. Many of us have animated Christmas displays that are set to music, and we want to take our footage and combine it with the original audio track in post-editing. Sometimes we are also shooting multiple camera angles, and we want to combine that footage in editing. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to do that and how to take your footage and sync all your videos and then sync that up with your audio track and then do multicam editing. I'll also talk about doing transitions between your video clips and color correcting if you're shooting in log format. While I won't be going into every last detail and technique with Premiere Pro, this should be a fairly comprehensive review of the steps and workflows needed to edit your Christmas display videos. So to start, I have Premiere Pro opened. I'm going to launch and start a new project here, and I'm going to just name this Christmas Demo. Click OK, and that's going to take me into Premiere Pro on this Assembly tab. And I want to navigate, I click the media browser here and navigate on these folders to where I have the videos. So it's just like you're navigating on your computer, and here I have these four video clips that I want to use. Now these video clips themselves are shot in 4K, or technically I guess this is UHD because it's these were 3840 by 2160, so not quite true 4K, but I did have some 4K footage from this last year. I was just kind of mixing what I liked best, and I think in the future I'm just going to stick with pure 4K. But in any event, I'll just refer to this as 4K, and when you're doing editing on files this size, there's so much information, and it's going to take a serious computer to be able to process that and do your editing. And even the computer I'm on now has a lot of horsepower to it, and it just can't do multi-camera editing on 4K. But what we do is we create proxies for these files. So these video files here, these four files, when we import them into Premiere Pro, what we're going to also do is create proxies. And so what the proxy is a lower resolution copy of it. And so we're going to basically divide it by 4. So I said this was 3840 by 2160, and when we do this importing, the software is going to generate a 960 by 540 copy of these files called a proxy, and we can do our editing on that lower resolution version, and the computer can handle that. And then when we're all done with it, it will export out the full, it'll do all the actual editing and rendering on the 4K footage, and we'll export that out as the finished product. So proxies enable us to actually work with 4K footage without physically having to work on the 4K footage, which would slow down the computer. So in this case, what we want to do is you have this ingest box and the little wrench here, and I'm going to click on this wrench to open the ingest settings. And I'm going to check this box, and we want to come here and tell it to create proxies. And now you have this preset, and right away if you click this menu, these are the presets that are there. Notice this one that's checked. I had to create this one because my UHD footage at 3840 by 2160, there was not a directly divisible by 4 preset here. So I did have to create this proxy, and you had to open up what's called Adobe Media Encoder, which is included with Premiere Pro. To do that, there are some videos on there on YouTube that go into this. I'm not going to talk about that for this case, because if you had normal 4K, any of these presets here, this one I would use the 1024 by 540 H264. This proxy I did is an H264 format, just at 960 by 540. So anyhow, long-winded explanation, but I'm going to use this proxy that I've done, and it just asks you here where do you want to send the files, and you can use them the same as the project or any number of these destinations. So I'm just going to go same with the project, and I can see here where that's going to be, and I'm just going to click OK. And now that closed that window, and you can see this index box was automatically checked. So then I will take these four files here, right click, and I'm going to hit import. And what that's going to do is you're going to see this is now going to open up here Adobe Media Encoder in a second. I think this computer's running a little bit slower since I'm doing this screen recording simultaneously, and it's going to open up Adobe Media Encoder and it's going to create these proxies. Alright, so Adobe Media Encoder is open and we are creating these proxies. And you can see as it's going through here, rendering these files, it's going pretty quickly, but as I said, this is a pretty powerful computer I'm on here. So this may take a little bit of time and you can definitely work on Premiere Pro in the background or do other things. But I typically like to just let this thing generate all these proxies and then I'll go to work. So while this is going, I'll pause the video and we'll return when this is done. Alright, Media Encoder has just finished rendering all the proxies. It only took a couple minutes, and I will close this window. We are done with that. Now we're back in Premiere Pro. And it has imported everything with the proxies. So I'll go to this editing tab and we see our four files here, and you see it's just the regular files that we started with. So how do you know that you have proxies associated with this? And what you want to do is you can move the mouse to this whole header here, right click and select metadata display, open up this Premiere Pro project metadata tab, scroll down and select proxy file path and proxy media file name and hit OK. Then if I just move this window over to the edge, you can see here that on these files it has the media path, so it shows the path that the proxy file we generated is in, and here's the file that the media encoder just did. This see, the file names are the same, it just added underscore proxy to the end. So we know that these files have the proxies associated with them. The next step I typically am going to do is I want to see, I need to work in these clips to find out the start points of how we're going to sync these videos. So I start with this one. I'm going to double click and it's going to open it into the source tab, and you can scroll through here and see this is our footage that we can go through. So if I hit play, we can just watch this go. So at the start of the sequence, this is my mega tree. I have some notes that are playing on it, and you'll start to see there's a little bit more going on here. Now the sequence is starting to play, but what I'm looking for here is what's a prominent thing. So I'm going to stop right there. What's something that's prominent in the display that I can use to sync all my clips to? And I don't want to do something in the first 5 seconds for sure. Ideally not in the first 10 seconds, and this is me personally running with a Falcon Pi player with master remotes, because there is a little bit of sync lag sometimes between the master and remotes, and you don't normally see this in real time during the display, but when you have all many sets of footage here on all these clips, you'll start to see a little bit of variability with how some of your lights are syncing in that first few seconds. So I like to do something a little bit further along, and I like right here, I'll back this up. If I hit this, watch for the arches come on, boom, right there. That's a good spot because I can see that easily. We're 20 seconds into this clip, so that's going to be a good spot to do the time code. And I see just from working on this file here, I had worked on a different time code. That's what this little green marker is. I want to clear that, so I'm just going to set clear all markers. I may have to do this on all the clips, but what I want to do is I'm just going to do this step back one frame, keep stepping back here. Oh, now the arches are off. Go forward a frame, forward another frame. There, they're on. So you see they're first one on, then they get a little bit brighter. I'm going to go with a second frame because sometimes there's some variability with this. So I just want to do the second frame here so the arches are on full brightness. And I'm going to click this add marker. And we're done with that one. I'm going to do the next one. So double click the next one. We're here. Again, I'm going to remove this marker that was there from when I previously did some work on this. And we're just going to play this until those arches come on. There. Stop. Go back. Click, click, click. They're off. Forward. 1. They're kind of dim. 2. Full brightness. Select marker. So now we've synced this one. Same thing with the next one. We'll do this. I'm going to have to clear my marker. Again, if you're starting off, you won't have to do that step. It's only because I had some previous working on some markers, and I'm just having to clear that out. There, they go on, back, there, 1 frame, 2 frames are basically full brightness, add a marker. And we're going to do the third one, or the fourth and final one. Clear that marker I don't want. There, arches are on. Go back. Now forward 1, 2 frames are full brightness, add a marker. So now what this has done is I've identified this point in all 4 of these clips. So I can tell Premiere Pro that I want to sync these clips at that marker, and that way all the clips will be perfectly in sync. Even if in those first few seconds there might be a little bit of catching up on some of the items, on some of my props. I have 14 or 15 Falcon PiPlayer remotes in my display. I don't even remember how many, but one of those numbers I have, and so there can sometimes be a little bit of lag, as I said, in the first couple seconds, but really not noticeable. But if you're trying to sync everything up, here we want this to be as perfect as possible, so that's why I'm roughly 20 seconds in. I found something noticeable that I can use to sync the timing on, and made that marker in there. So now the next thing we need to do is sync them up. So what we're going to do, I'm going to select all of those, right click, and we're going to select create multi-camera source sequence. So we're going to do that. We can name this whatever we want. I'll name it Christmas Demo Multicam. And this is what you want selected here is clip marker, because these are all the ways you can synchronize your video clips. In points and out points, that doesn't apply for us. We're not doing that time code. No, this is what we want, the clip marker. So I'm going to do that and select OK. And what it's done is it's created a folder here with process clips. So these are all the clips are in there, and we have this this Christmas demo multicam, and this is basically a master file that has all 4 of those video clips in there. So you can either right click, put new sequence from clip, or drag this over into your timeline. So I'm just going to drag that over, and now we're in the timeline. And just the way my the settings I have, this brought in audio as well, but there is no audio on the drone footage. It's silent. So I want to get rid of this audio here that's basically a mute track. So I want to click the media there, right click, and I'm going to just hit unlink, and that unpairs the video and the audio. Select the audio on the bottom and hit delete, and now that removed the audio. The next step is going to be importing the audio track into the project. Now we could have done this earlier from the assembly tab when we were bringing in the video files, but it's just as easy to do now, and there's no right or wrong way. So from over here, I'm going to right click, select import, and that brings up this browser, and I'll select the audio track. In this case, it's Carol of the Bells by Lindsey Sterling. And there's the MP3 file, and I will drag that into the timeline. Before I go any further, I do want to talk about these 2 buttons here, the toggle multi-camera view and toggle proxies button. By default, I don't believe they are visible here in this workspace. So what you want to do is add them to the toolbar by pressing this plus sign to open the button editor, and then you're going to drag them into the toolbar here. So drag the toggle multi-camera view and drag the toggle proxies buttons over there into the toolbar and select OK. The reason why I mentioned that here is if you have an older computer, it may not have the processing power to play back this 4K video file in real time, and until you tell Premiere Pro to use the proxies, it's going to use the 4K footage. So you tell it to use the proxy by selecting that button, and when it turns blue, now you're using the proxy. So now you would be playing back the lower resolution file, so you wouldn't have lagging if you had an older computer. The other thing you may need to set is over here, your playback resolution. You can go from anywhere from full down to potentially 1/8 depending on your settings, or 1/16 depending on your settings. In this case I can only go to 1/8, but my computer can play just fine with full resolution on these files, so I will leave that at full, but just FYI, you may need to adjust that as well. So the next step is going to be actually syncing up our files. So we're going to zoom in here. I'm going to hold the mouse at the end of this bar and just zoom in, drag it over, and I will also drag over this scrubber here to where my sequence starts to play. So you can see my mega tree starting to play there, and I'll come back a few frames. I think somewhere around here is where the audio should start. So now I'll drag the audio over to there, and we're just going to play and see how it is. And now I'm going to look for certain notes. So up ahead there's going to be some notes on the mega tree star, and I'm just going to see how this looks. So I'll play that again. It looks like the audio might be a fraction ahead of the video. So we'll watch this again. Yeah, that should be over a little closer, that sound, to the mega tree star. So I think I need to drag this audio over. So I'm going to drag this just a little bit to the right. We'll try 4/100ths. Just a tip here, the more you zoom in, the finer control you get for this. So if you're zoomed out further, you may not be able to zoom in to as good a resolution. You may only be like 1/10 of a second or 1/15 of a second, but if you zoom in here, you can go down to 100th of a second. So just keep that in mind when you're working and trying to fine tune it. That looks better. So that's pretty good. I think good enough for government work. Maybe it could be fine-tuned a little bit, but good enough for what we're doing here. So I will go to the end of the track here, and we have some excess video footage that we need to trim. So I'm going to take this razor blade and just cut it there, select the tool, and delete. Come back here, again, razor blade. It just snaps to that point where the audio is, and we will select the excess and delete, and in the open area you can right click and ripple delete, and that will take both audio and video tracks back to 0 there. And now if we hit play, looks perfect. So we're good to go. Now we'll start doing our actual editing, and so I'll bring that back to 0. As you see, we have our proxies enabled, and now I'm going to select this, the multicam view, and that turned blue as well. And now we have our 4 video feeds playing simultaneously here. And the way we'll do this is we're going to just edit in real time. We're going to play the song and just select which cameras we want to use. And we can do that one of 2 ways. We can use the mouse and select the cameras here, or I can use the numbers on the keyboard, camera 1, 2, 3, and 4, or so on if you have more cameras that you're using. So in this case I'm going to start with camera 1 and hit play, and we're going to do some real-time editing. And now I also like to think of this like sequencing. I want to kind of think about the music, the bars on the music, and what I have programmed, and kind of use that artistic sense in my video editing as well. So So right here I'll go to camera 3. Camera 2. Camera 1. Go back to camera 3. Camera 2. Camera 1. Camera 4. Camera 1. And so you just go through the whole thing. I'll stop there. And as you can see, as soon as we stop playback, all the edit points here just filled in on the timeline. So once you go through, you do the whole timeline here, you get your whole the whole video done. You'll have all your points in, and now you can go and fine-tune things. So say for example here where we have camera 1 selected, say you want a different camera, say camera 4. All you do is just select it here while it's stopped, and you can see it's changing the cameras, and you can go through and change it however you like. Same thing here. If you want this one to change, you just need to move this little scrubber here so it's within the boundaries of it, and then you can go through and change to whatever camera angle. And now what about the actual placement of the cuts? If you want to change that, what I like to do often is I'll take the multi-camera off, and now I can zoom in on it. So we'll just zoom in a little closer and we'll just play. Because I notice like here is one I have off. I really want this to be on camera 1 where it's still zoomed in on that. So what I would do is you come here and you want to change this because it's on the ripple edit tool. You want the rolling edit tool because that'll allow you to roll essentially this cut point. So I want to move this cut point from camera 1 to 3 a little closer. I want it right about here. Let's zoom in and take a look. So I want this zoomed in and right there. So that's actually pretty good. So I like that better. And now we need to talk about the transitions because obviously we want a smoother transition than this. That's kind of rough. And the way we do that is we come here to the Effects tab, and we'll open this up, and we have video transitions, and you have a whole bunch of different video transitions to choose from. Personally, I like the dissolves, and cross dissolve is my favorite. And so a way you can do this is to drop this on, just drag it onto the transition, and you can see it places it there. This is actually helpful if I undock this. So usually I have this program monitor on my actual other computer monitor, so I'll kind of move that to the side here. You can partially see it, and you want the effects controls tab to be active in the effects panel. And so if I select here, you can see, I'll drag that over, actually I'll have to move this mostly out of the way, but you can see here is that transition, and you can use that rolling edit tool up here as well and fine-tune the placement. But here it shows the duration, and I just had it at 10 frames here. Say you want it 20 frames, you can just hit 20 and change it, and now I've made this longer. But I'll go back to 10, and now we have this nice smooth transition, and I will drag this back over and we'll see how this looks. Pretty good. I might want to move this over a bit. I can try and move that a bit there, and we'll see how this plays. Kind of shuffling my monitors here, but you know, you get the idea. You can just play with that. But really, you don't want to be dragging these effects at every one. So what I suggest doing, and I'm going to dock this guy back up there, is if you find a transition that you like, you can right click here and set it as your default transition. And then you'll come here and click with the mouse, and you want to set your default transition duration. And in my case, or I should say the default here is about 1 second, and it goes, you can go to frames or seconds. The default I believe was 1 second, But for a faster song, I kind of like 10 frames a second. A slower song, maybe 20 to 25 frames, but you can just see what you like and go with that, and you can just set that as your default. And if you want one to be longer or shorter, you can just, as I showed you here in this duration, you can just select a longer or shorter transition. Like I said, if I wanted to make this one 20 frames, I can just hit 20, hit enter, and it's there. We've made a longer transition to blend those two. But that's all and fine for one, but we want to do all of these. So the way we do that is we want to select our selection tool here. We're going to select everything and go into sequence and apply default transitions to selection. And now that's gone through and put our default crossfades on all those selections we made throughout it. Including here at the end, we have a crossfade here at the end, and this is where I usually like to do this dip to black and do a fade out. So I can add that there. I'll go to this effect controls and say I want to make this a second. I'll do 100, and that gives it a second. Or if we want to go 2 seconds, go 200, and now we have at the very end here a nice gradual fade out. So anyhow, that gives you a kind of an idea of how you do your transitions. So once you have all your transitions done, your clip, you'll do a whole playback here, and I like to do this whole playback start to finish on the single camera here, not the multicam. I'll just do on the single camera, playback start to finish, and once I'm happy with that, we're off to correcting for color, which is kind of the final step in the process. I didn't mention this earlier, but I do my filming in D-Log format, which is basically a very flat color profile. It aims in getting maximum, basically the maximum information and dynamic range in the shot to allow you to tweak it in the video editing. And a lot of people will just simply shoot in default normal, or I think in DJI they call it none for a color profile, or there's another true color I think is another one, but those are just like the default color profiles. So your color's probably going to be pretty accurate. You may not need to tweak it, but it certainly doesn't hurt. But when you shoot in log format, there's just more information. You can extract a little bit better color out of this. That being said, we're shooting at night. There's not much light coming through, so we don't have a lot to work with versus like a normal daytime shot. But I'll show you the steps on how we would do the color correction. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go into the color tab here, and this is where we're going to be working, is in this panel over here. But we want to make an adjustment layer, and an adjustment layer will allow us to do one setting that will affect all of these clips. Because ideally when you're shooting your clips from your drone, I hope you're shooting them all in the exact same settings on your camera. Because if not, now you're going to be having to correct for that. So shoot everything the exact same on your camera, and then you'll just make one correction here. So over here we're going to right click and select new item, and we want a new adjustment layer. So we'll add that. This just shows your video settings. That should all be good. And we'll click OK, and we'll drag this adjustment layer into your timeline. And then I just like to come here and I'll just drag it to the full length of my clip. Now I will select that with the mouse, and as soon as we did that, this panel opens up. And what we want to see here is we want this lumetri scopes, and this is going to be kind of challenging to do with just one monitor. So I need to undock this here, and I'm going to undock this. I really don't need here right now. Let me try and scrub it to a point here where I have more going on. And I'll try and blow this up here for a second so you can see. Coming from the log profile, it's, I said, very flat, so our blacks aren't really black here. They're kind of grayed out, and the color is relatively flat, so we need to correct for this. And the way we want to do that, and I'll shrink this guy, actually I'll just move him over off to the side here, I'll bring him back, is we want to get into the lumetri scopes. And essentially what this is a visual representation of our color profile, and we're going to use this to help the color correction of our log footage. Now if you don't have this Lumetri Scopes window or Lumetri color panel over here visible, go into your window and in the menu just select them there. Now I'm going to bring over our footage here, and I want to make certain that my proxies are off. So if you had proxies on before, make sure you toggle them off, because you want to, when you're working with this, you want to see the full resolution as you're adjusting the color. So I'm going to shrink this down. I said normally I do keep this on my secondary monitor, but I'll have to shrink this down here so we can see what we're doing as we're working along. Now LUTs here, a lot of people like working with LUTs. I'm not a big fan of them, and all it is, it's called a LUT, stands for lookup table, and it's basically just a preset for your color settings. And I'm not a big fan of using them. I think I can get just as good, if not better, by just using the sliders and adjusting the image myself. So the first thing I like to do with this night footage, and this profile, like I said, this is not what you're going to see in a daytime footage. Daytime, you're going to be much more uniformly distributed. But here, we want to take the blacks and we want to bring the blacks down close to 0 here. So as I select it, it just kind of jumped up on me, but I want to bring this down, and you can see on the footage there, it already gets a bit darker. So I take them down to 0. I usually like to add a little bit of contrast or a little bit of exposure on my night shots, anywhere I'd say 1.2 to 1.4, 1.5 maybe. So I add a little bit more of the exposure and add a little bit of contrast. That'll help with the blacks as well. And I want to bring my highlights up because we don't have much going on as it is with our lights. So our lights are basically all we got. So bringing the highlights up, as you see in our Lumetri scopes here, we're adding more information. So we want to bring the highlights up, and this is the advantage of shooting in log format. We do have more data. I can bring a little bit on the shadows. I'll fine-tune adjust this later, but I'll start with that for now. My next place I like to go is color wheels and match, and we're not going to work on the color wheels themselves, because if you select here, kind of adds tint to the image, and we don't want that. So I'll just double click to get rid of it. We want to just work on these sliders. So I'm going to bring up the highlights about 20% from where they're at. They're already in the middle there. Kind of bring it up 20% or so. Same thing with my midtones, bring those up. Again, if you're watching the scopes here, we're bringing more data out. But now that does make it look more grainy. If you can see, it's definitely grainy in here, and we want to pull that back in the shadows because it's all in the shadows where we're getting that grain. So we're pull those shadows back, and we're pulling that scope back closer to 0. So pull that back a bit there, call that good, and then I'll come to the Creative tab. And here, again, because I'm shooting on a flat profile, I typically want to increase the sharpen a bit and the vibrance. Usually a little more aggressive on the vibrance, since it's trying to just take the colors that are kind of below average, that are not being well represented here, and increase those a bit. So that's what vibrance is kind of doing, and saturation just kind of gives everything. So I don't do too much on the saturation, just a few percent here. And let's blow this up here, and we'll see how we did. So it's looking okay. Looks a little noisy for me. I'm going to come back here. Might add a little bit more contrast. I can maybe pull these shadows back just a little bit there. That looks pretty good. Now I can kind of scrub through this. One thing I look for, well, it was there. One thing I look for there is on my floods where they're going. I want to see, this is an area where I can see how grainy it is, and it's a bit grainy for my liking. I might have to come back here and pull these shadows back a little bit more. This is where it really helps doing it on a big monitor as well. So that looks pretty good. Let me just play this here and see what we're looking at. Not much grain there. It's looking pretty good. My blacks are black. The colors are true. This is pretty good. You might do some extra tweaking, but this kind of shows you how you take the log footage that was very flat profile, and with just a few corrections in the sliders, you can make this into a much more vibrant color in the way it's supposed to be. Now clearly there's a lot more adjustments you can do here, and those that are more comfortable with Photoshop and video editing can go to town and work on these adjustment curves and a lot more settings that you have here to do color correction. But what I want to show in this video is that you don't have to really work on all these fancy corrections. You can do most everything with just a few adjustments in basic correction, a few adjustments in creative, and a few adjustments here in the color wheels and match, and you've corrected your footage. So I hope that helps here and shows how you can do the color adjustment, and once that's done, your video is ready for exporting. So what you can do is go File, Export, and Media, or Control M, and that pulls up your export window, and this is where you would go and export it, and your formats and all your settings here. In this case, if I just exported the way this was, I would be exporting at the same 4K resolution, but you can hit max sequence settings, which would be the exact same as what your input was, and export your footage. Just make certain when you're exporting that your proxies are off, that you are actually exporting from your full resolution files. So that's it for this Premiere Pro tutorial. I hope you found it useful, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.